very excited to be doing this, considering the very first travel video on the channel was of Spain, Andalusia in specific. It's exciting to be finally adding more. It's actually quite a turnaround. Initially, I genuinely thought we weren't going to make these episodes at all. I mean, don't get me wrong, the trip was incredible, had an amazing time, nothing went wrong. It's just that at the time, we were revisiting some locations, and it was just as the channel was pivoting towards more history-focused episodes, I was starting to wonder that whether in between various ancient monuments, I'd still continue to film the more personal stuff that makes a travel episode, like, driving between the places and the food we had, etc. So these episodes have less of that, but when I came back to this footage and going over all the memories, I just couldn't resist. So we are beginning in Malaga, which is, no shocker, probably the cheapest place to fly. All pressed together, we had just over 48 hours in the Malaga area. So we landed in the afternoon, pretty uneventful getting through, met with our hire car company, which was malagacar.com, and they were pretty chill. Worked out about 94 quid for 2 days with no need for a credit card, so that's great. Drove into the city with the sun shining. As you can see, it's quite the metropolis. Yeah, Malaga is not like the other cities we've visited. Now, maybe that reflects on us and the sort of places we go. We are trending towards coastal, historic towns, probably with Venetian forts or similar. Malaga is sort of everything at once. Maybe it just feels that way because it's a busy city in another culture that feels unfamiliar, but it's pretty full on. I was going to write a scathing paragraph or two about the parking sitch in Malaga, but actually, it's pretty much just like most big cities, really. Just attempting to park anywhere near the centre, which itself is a labyrinthine grid of streets barely wide enough to fit a goat down. We eventually found subterranean car parks, which were, pretty pricey, but okay, sure. After dropping our bags, we headed straight for the historical centre. There's a Roman theatre just below the Alcazaba, terminology here. That's the name generally given to the Islamic fortifications or palaces you'll find across Andalusia and the rest of Spain. The theatre is out in the open for all to see, so while you can pay to go in, you also don't really need to. The Alcazaba, now this is probably one of Malaga's most special spots. It's like lots of gardens, kind of layering up with walls ascending up the hill and crowned with the ornate courtyards of the palace. I don't think it's too much of a secret that amongst the many history series we're building towards, we're aiming to compile a series of sites from around Al-Andalus, which is the Islamic rule of Spain that lasted over 700 years. So I won't go into all the details in this episode. In a similar vein, there's the Gibraltar fortifications at the top of the hill. However, you'll find this somewhat less romantic than the ornate architecture of the Alcazaba, as this is nowadays closer to an artillery fort in form. I mean, there's some highlights and some of the best views over the city, but don't be expecting a turreted medieval castle like elsewhere. I mean, there's these, but they appear to have been patched up with cement, so not entirely original. One unusual detail, I have never seen a black squirrel before. And I know the lighting here isn't perfect, but this is not just a red squirrel in the shade. It was, at the very least, a very dark brown, so, well, there you go. And with the sun setting, it was great to have the altitude to see over the city. I think we're going to need a supercut to make the most of this whole complex. I am always a little on edge when I'm making episodes about places that people have likely already visited. In some ways, I always assume people are more travelled than us. Since when I was younger, I barely ever left the UK, so almost all of my experience of travel has been from the last few years. But you take somewhere like Korčula, for example. It's both quite an open secret at this point, but also ask a cross-section of your friends. There's a good chance none of them have heard of it. So for the purpose of the episode, you're probably introducing the place to most people for the first time. But Malaga, a lot of people, particularly Brits, come here. This was best encapsulated by this shot. I caught this on the way down from the Gibraltar, and, it was fortunate timing with the colours and everything, so yeah, pretty chuffed, okay, that's a nice shot. But after a while, a mate of mine went on the trip to Malaga, and sure enough, pretty much the exact same shot, same composition, and it's like, yeah, obviously, outside of doing something drastic, possibly illegal, you're not going to be doing anything wildly original by filming some of the famous shots around Malaga. Anyway, rather in need of food, we plonked ourselves down nearby, fully expecting this was sort of a tourist trap, but not caring all that much. Yeah, the pizza was all right. There's kind of something off about the base, but like I said, we're barely mentioning food this time around, and we deliberately just trying to eat inexpensively. So cool, fine, great, whatever. Busy on the streets on the way back, a great buzz around the town. The Airbnb, by the way, was fine, not much to say on it. So, day 2, we got an early start. The sunrise in October wasn't till 8:30, so we left under the cover of darkness. Oh, and this is very random, but just a heads up. If you have to drive through central Malaga and your tyres are making this absolutely bonkers sound, don't worry, it's not just you. I don't know what makes the roads kind of squeak in this uncanny manner. I tried to capture this sound in camera, but without much success. Yeah, it really freaked us out at 7:30. We thought we had a flat or something. So, just a 45-minute drive away, and here we are. This is Antequera, and it's pretty special. We got there just before sunrise. You could see the clouds creeping across the tops of the mountains. A quick look at the town, but we mainly headed early to catch these. These are, no exaggeration, some of the most significant Neolithic monuments in the entirety of Spain. You may or may not know what a dolmen is. Well, Antequera boasts 3 of unusual size and scale. This one in particular, Dolmen de Menga, is absolutely vast. It's one of the largest of its kind in Europe. And if that wasn't enough, at the back of the structure is a well around 20 meters deep. This was a comparatively recent discovery from 2005. It's possible it was not contemporary with the rest of the dolmen, we're not quite clear. It appears to have been infilled only in the last 300 years. Then just a few yards away is the Dolmen de Viera, which anywhere else would be spectacular, but it's cursed instead to play second fiddle to the Menga dolmen. Finally, around 5 minutes down the road by car is the Tholos el Romeral, which is actually somewhat later than the other two, instead dating closer to the 1800s BC. Now, while I'm not inferring a direct connection, it is interesting how, compared with the gigantic orthostats of Menga, this does look a lot closer to a Mycenaean Tholos tomb. And in between all of these, though funny enough, across a main road and surprisingly neglected, these remains of the Roman baths. So yeah, it's quite a bumper sight, all things considered. We doubled back into the town and headed for the Alcazaba, and please pause to enjoy these views. Just look at that. I mean, really, this was near magical. Quick look through the Alcazaba. Funny enough, even though its walls remain very impressive, the ruins in its interior are, pretty wrecked. There's also these Roman baths just over the edge. So yeah, Antequera just keeps on giving. I'd remembered the dolmens, but I must say, until I looked back through this footage, I'd forgotten just how special the town was as well. Final footnote on Antequera. You can get there by train, but watch out. Most or all of the trains from Malaga go to Antequera Santa Ana station, which is doing a great job of serving these olive trees. And basically nowhere else. I mean, check the map. It's 17 kilometers from Antequera. You can see this is less than especially ideal. It's because it's part of the high-speed network, and those mostly have to travel in straight-ish lines. I've always tried to use public transport where it's available, but you are just making work for yourself if you try and train to Antequera. This is quite a recent development. When we were there was only 3 buses a day connecting to the station. I mean, taxi was apparently around €25, doubtless more nowadays. So yes, don't recommend that option in specific. Okay, well, we were heading through a set of snaking, winding roads west through the mountains. The roads are mostly fine, surface-wise. It's a bit of a white-knuckle ride if you try and push the hundreds of blind corners at more than 50. Gonna skim a couple of bits here. We passed through El Chorro, which is this beautiful mountain setting popular with rock climbers and all sorts of adventure tourism type stuff. This was on our way to Bobastro, which was a real highlight, but I'm gonna save that for a future episode. After that, we drove a further hour west to see the Roman site of Asinipo, but okay, this was you may recall us having this problem in the Balearic Isles, where many Spanish archaeological sites don't see fit to stay open much longer than 2 o'clock. So we knew in advance that Asinipo closed at 2:30, so we were rushing to get there, and we made it, only to find out, no, this site closes 45 minutes early. We got there at 1:48. So, look, I'm trying to avoid running my mouth about it because, what would be the use? But seriously, what the hell is wrong with you? It's not all Spanish archaeological sites either, but whatever. So that was frustrating, but it did get us most of the way to our next stop. Now, something we were encountering, which was a bit of a surprise, was how difficult it was proving to go with the flow on this trip. I mean, I'm virtually an ascetic when it comes to travel, and I didn't have a single bite that entire day till we got to Ronda and sat down around 3 p.m. It might have just been random happenstance, but there were just next to no food options on the roadside for the entire 2+ hours, apart from actually going into a town, having to sit down at a restaurant and losing about an hour. Even Antequera, somehow we managed to go through a whole slice of the town to the Alcazaba and not encounter a single place of commerce, not even the tiniest drink stand. As I mentioned, the proclivity of Spanish historical sites to close just after lunch turns almost any itinerary into a travelling salesman problem. I get comments that we're trying to do everything too fast, and I do recommend not doing our itineraries. We just don't have the money, basically just the money to luxuriate around Europe at a snail's pace. We pretty much have to take these trips as a shooting schedule, which means quicker stops. So we arrived in Ronda pretty parched, and food options were all leaning generously towards price gouging. At the time, I felt like I didn't get the best possible coverage of Ronda, but looking back, we did all right, considering. It's a pretty major visitor spot, but hey, how's this for a USP? You see this yawning chasm? Yeah, that's Ronda Bridge. It is quite something, to say the least. The town is in a nice defensible spot. All you've got to do is throw up some solid defences on the other end of the promontory. Now, our priority for these trips is Al-Andalusian architecture, so the biggest street was the Arabic Baths, which closed at 3, hence me arriving in a hot mess after the whole Asinapo thing. But very glad I just made it to those. It's a particularly great example. There's sadly nothing too special about the Alcazaba ruins at Ronda. You can't really access them for the most part. It's pretty much just this wall enclosure, and there's other stuff built on top. The external walls are pretty incredible, though. There's a couple of pretty great churches, and, hey, now and again, you just get these beautiful streets cascading off to a vanishing point. So now I'm saying it out loud. I don't know why I'm sounding like there's a but coming. It was great. I guess we were just tired and a bit hot by this point, and even just drinks and ice creams were unusually costly. But definitely glad to have dropped in. This is probably one of the biggest draws in the area if you're visiting Malaga. Well, back in the car, it was an hour and a half back to Malaga. One thing I haven't made enough of a big deal about. This part of Andalusia is just full of vast landscapes, these big skies, huge vistas baked with sunshine. They were really something special. They made the drives that day something worth savouring. In fact, for all the amazing stuff we'd seen that day, these are the first things I see in my mind's eye when I think back to this day. Let's have a quick supercut. Well, back into Malaga and made it in before sunset. We had some pretty great Mexican, so great I scarcely remember to film it. The prices hovered around €3 a dish. I did think that everywhere we've been so far had been weirdly pricey. We hadn't really had time to get the minimum safe distance away from the tourist hotspots at any of the places we've been. Well, okay, just time to see a little bit more of Malaga. So I snuck out at the crack of dawn to get more time in the historic centre, and it was a beautiful morning. Caught this tall ship down at the water's edge just as the colour was breaking. Now, while the streets are tight, they aren't as immersive like the other cities of Seville, Cordoba or Palma. You don't quite have the old town vibes. It's more just a modern shopping centre, but it's got some rather lovely splashes of Baroque now and again. I mean, the Cathedral of Malaga is really something. It's like a Baroque spaceship. This could genuinely sell me on Baroque, which is not normally my jam. #Romanesque for life. I was running on no coffee. In fact, I hadn't had an espresso since Gatwick Airport, and I could feel myself fading like that picture out of Back to the Future 3. The cafes in Malaga were not looking that promising. The coffee did seem to be more of an afterthought than a genuine passion. We ended up getting breakfast here, including these, which are essentially fried batter that you dunk in chocolate, kind of a form of churro, basically, but pretty great. And again, reasonable prices, not to sound like a cheapskate, but $1.30 for a coffee was much more like it. There was an amusing vignette playing out outside, which I was reticent to film in case the police got in my face for pointing a camera, but put it this way, it bodes well for the levels of crime in Malaga that this wobbly manhole cover thing required the presence of 2 police officers, rising to 4 to try and fix it. They were all present for about an hour and a half. Anyway, that's mostly it for Malaga. In some ways, making these episodes is much harder because, I'm well aware that many people have already been to these places themselves. They're not these obscure, out-of-the-way destinations. So while this might be a helpful primer to the uninitiated, there's always going to be plenty of people to get in the comments to tell me I'm doing it wrong and invite me to jump off a bridge, which in the case of Malaga would likely prove fatal, as this riverbed doesn't appear to have glimpsed water since the Pleistocene. I don't know. Because this is going to dovetail into a short series of episodes from around different parts of Spain, it should be interesting to get snapshots from a range of locations, but sure, to be absolutely clear, no, you don't need me to tell you a lot of this. That's why I scarcely pitch in with accommodation or food recommendations. You can just find your own. It's not hard. But one more thing before we close out. We had around 48 hours in Malaga, as the title does somewhat imply, but 6 days later, before we flew back, we had a final night staying there. We didn't set out to do much ambitious that evening. It had been a busy week and we had a comparatively early flight. By the time we got back into the city, I just had time to jog about half an hour from the accommodation, and good thing I did, otherwise I would have missed this. Just one of those unique sunsets that always stays with you. You know, without shooting up the Alcazaba again, there's not many other places in the city I could have caught this on foot, so heading for the beach made the perfect spot. And I know a lot of people do Malaga pretty much as a beach holiday, or maybe they're off to a resort along this stretch, of which there are, of course, a great many. And I don't know, that's not really our speed. We like to, what's that thing? Live our lives, not just sit on the beach like a piece of discarded plastic. But that's not to say the beach here isn't lovely, because it clearly is. Somewhat put me in mind of Bournemouth, actually. And this made for the perfect end to the trip. So next day, train station, airport. I mean, my goodness, the airport is massive. It makes the Death Star look like a rural train station. In summary, Malaga, the town, way more huge than I'd realised going in. The cultural centre is pretty great, and the history stuff like the Alcazaba and the Roman theatre is all pretty cool. You can comfortably get around those in about an afternoon. Antequera, as you can tell, was a real all-time highlight. It was incredibly special. But Bobastro was amazing as well, and Ronda was great too. So that's all from Malaga, but we are only just getting started, as after Malaga we are off to Seville, then Mérida, and then finally Córdoba before linking back to Malaga again. So next episode we get a chance to revisit Seville since our last brief summary of it. And now we're doing more from here. It means we've got enough to get a Spain playlist together. So yeah, check that out, particularly for our older episodes on the Balearic Isles. The music you've been hearing in the background is ours. We make all the music for these episodes, and you can find it on bandcamp.com. If you want to support the channel, that's the place to do it. Otherwise, find us on all the socials, and we'll be back very soon.